I tried to think of a pretentious intro that might rival some of the actual dialogue that the elves had in this. I got nothing though. Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. So, yeah. First things first, I have not been super excited for this. A bit like with Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, I'm kind of done with the source material. Whatever was good about it, I've gotten out of it. And in the case of Lord of the Rings, that came from the Lord of the Rings films and the 1977 animated version of The Hobbit, and not so much the Hobbit movies. And the short version of my thoughts on this reminds me of The Hobbit a lot more than it does The Lord of the Rings. And I'm not talking about the books, I'm talking about the movies. And for me, that's a problem. That's not great. So unlike, say, House of the Dragon, which I have been finding pleasantly surprising, that review will be out tomorrow. I had a bit of a crazy weekend. Unlike that, which reminded me of what I liked about that in the first place, this kind of reminds me a lot of the stuff that has frustrated me and made me not super excited for this. That having been said, like, it's not terrible, but most of the problems that I have with this are similar to problems that I had with the Hobbit movies. There's some other problems that are a bit more nitpicky, but like in the grand scope, that's kind of it with me. I don't think it's terrible, but I'll also say I thought the second episode was better because, plot started happening as opposed to lore dump. But I don't know. I suppose it's worth saying up front. I'm not really. I do plan to at least try and watch the entirety of this first season. I am not expecting to do episode by episode reviews after this. I mean, the main reason I'm getting on the premiere in a semi reasonable amount of time is because a friend of mine who loves Lord of the Rings in every form significantly more than I do, they held a watch party. So a bunch of us got together, and about half the people there fell asleep. Uh, so there you go. I mean, like, to be fair, both those people had crazy work days and were wiped out, but just saying. So I'll tell you the big thing that this kind of did. It made it very clear to me why Tolkien filtered those stories, the Lord of the Rings in particular, through the Hobbits. Because the Hobbits are, enjoyable and have lovely personalities, and the elves in particular are really boring. They're just stoic, and there's never subtext to almost anything they say. They just say a thing straight out with minimal facial expression, and wow. It's not like the elves can't work. They have worked elsewhere, but like there's a reason they're usually supporting cast. Ha! That's part of why episode 2 is better. We get dwarves in that one, and the dwarves inject a lot of personality. I actually unabashedly, not even just by comparison to the elf stuff, I did unabashedly really like the dwarf material. I liked the stuff that took place in Khazad-dûm. I liked the setting. I thought it was really cool to see it realized as a lively place as opposed to the ruin that we saw in the Lord of the Rings movies. I really liked, what was it, Durin, the dwarven prince. He was great. Liked his wife. They were, they as a couple, they were terrific. I thought they were great and they were sweet, and being around them suddenly gave Elrond a bit more personality than he'd had when he was just around other elves. Galadriel's pretty good. She's probably the highlight of the elves for me right now because the actress is able to convey a pretty sizable amount while not doing that much. That having been said, the character right now is very flat. And this is actually true of, well, the elves especially, but a lot of the characters, which is that they don't seem to have much life outside of the thing they're currently doing. And that's especially true of Galadriel. We get her introduced, we briefly see her as a child, and then it's like her brother was killed by Sauron, so she seeks revenge for her brother. And that's like the entire thing that personifies who she is in everything we've seen since then. And it's one of those things where, like, you can have an obsessive character without having that be literally the only thing about them. So, like, example, Batman's an obsessive character, but when done correctly, without diminishing his obsession with his war on crime, you can still have more dynamic relationships and other interests in his life, like his relationship with Robin, whoever that might be at the time, his relationship with Alfred, his on and off again with Catwoman, with Selena Kyle, and how those bump up against his obsession and maybe at times even make him question that and how that happens. That's how you get a dynamic in like a well-written Batman. Sherlock Holmes, another good example. Holmes needs Watson not just because Watson gives Holmes a reason to explain for the sake of the reader or the audience what is going on, but it also gives Holmes something other than obsessing over mysteries all the time. It gives him another facet by giving him that relationship. Galadriel right now is lacking other facets, and it's just the obsession. Like, almost every line of dialogue she has relates to her obsession for killing Sauron. Also, the front end exposition dump was not particularly well handled. It covered a lot, and it chose weird points to jump over things. Like, it talks about Morgoth, but then really doesn't show or deal with what he was very much, and then leaps towards introducing Sauron, but then establishes and Sauron was defeated without actually showing us that. And so, since you showed him established but didn't show him defeated, the whole thing of Galadriel like hunting him down when everyone else thinks he's dead feels like we've skipped over 2 pages or so. It's not handled especially smoothly. Again, like, to a certain degree, I understand that they had a lot of lore to dump at the front end. So I'm not complaining that it's there, but I think it could have been handled better than it was. There are some other bits, aside from the dwarves here and there, that are well done. I was actually pretty impressed with the introduction of a single solitary orc as something terrifying. It reminded me a bit like when they reintroduced the Daleks for a modern era Doctor Who with, when Christopher Eccleston came back. They spent a whole episode establishing the threat and the danger of just one. And this does a similar thing in the second episode with giving us just one orc. And it is nasty, and it is animalistic, and it is vicious, and it's scary. And that's good. That's good. Now, we'll probably run into the issue of, as soon as there's a huge group of them, they get, dealt with handily. But generally speaking, if you want to make an army of something seem scary, show us how scary just one of them is first. And this does that, and it does it pretty well. As far as the other stuff goes, most of the effects are pretty good, and like some shots are very, very pretty. There was like one random really bad green screen composite, like when I'm not gonna remember all these names. I'm bad with names. You should know that if you're a regular around here. If you're not, thanks for watching. But when the elf who was a guard is like talking to his commander, and they're like up in a tower overlooking this human village, the green screen compositing on those shots is real bad. It's real bad. But they kind of stood out because mostly the effects are very good. You can see the money up on the screen. You can tell that a lot of money was spent on this. So it does, for the most part, look very good. However, at times it sacrifices something that the original Lord of the Rings trilogy did in order to just look pretty. So here's what I mean by that. The first Lord of the Rings films, the original trilogy, for as much work as went into creating something very, very true to the books, there was also a really heavy emphasis on practicality. When you had things like the armor and the weapons, especially the weapons and especially the swords, because like they had a sword master doing all the fight choreography, so if he was going to be able to do his job, they had to be using swords that could be used in a way similar to a real sword in real life. So when I see these elves with these massive impractical swords with these hilts that are this long. It's like, that's not even two-handed wielding. That's like three-handed wielding. And it's on their backs in a way that's like, how are you even gonna, like, it looks pretty, but it's super impractical, which is not something I normally inherently hold against a fantasy story. Like, you want a practical but pretty weapons, go have impractical but pretty weapons. But when a show is going out of its way to evoke these other movies, even though, I don't think copyright-wise they are allowed to make direct reference to them. They're just built off similar source material and going for a similar aesthetic. But, the comparison's fair. I think the show is inviting it. And then there's things that like also can work on the page, but don't work when you see it try to be realized. And like, I think some of the elves sailing off across the sea into the Grey Havens is a solid example of that, because it's one thing to put on the page something like, and the elves stood holding their weapons, standing tall and singing as they sailed off into the light. You can write that and it reads pretty well. You actually try and show it, and you show us all these elves just standing there. And you cut to something else for a little bit and you come back and the elves are still just standing there. And you realize they've just stood there for the entire length of a sea voyage. And suddenly you laugh. You can't not. It's ridiculous when realized visually, this somewhat more poetic and broad overview of what happened, trying to nail down the specific nuts and bolts and show it. Yeah, it doesn't play right. So there's a little bit of that going on as well. I don't know what to call them. Well, the viewing group I did, we called them the Probbits, because they're not quite hobbits, they're pre-hobbits. So pre-hobbit, Probbit. So the Probbits were like nice in the same way that, hobbits in these stories are usually nice. They are lively and they give you this sense of like, this is what would be lost if this world was lost. Because like, as pretty as the elves' lives are, they also like seem kind of boring to me. I wouldn't want to do more than visit an elven kingdom. I would kind of be cool with like taking a real extended stay with hobbits or probbits. So like, they're important to have there for that reason, and they have that general effect on the story with their presence, which is good. We've got the stranger from the meteor. I don't know what's going on there. Like, my first thought is wizard. I don't know why, but like, that's my first thought. I don't know what the deal there is. Obviously we'll find out as it goes along. There is what, okay. This is gonna be like really petty. And I know that, but a lot of the elves aren't pretty enough. Especially like the men that they got. They got a lot of real square-jawed guys. And they don't have that same sort of silken, delicate features that most of the elves we've seen. Not like Galadriel, she's a good fit. I think she's kind of the only female elf that we've been getting so far. But the guys, I like, especially God, what's his name? Celebrimbor? Whatever. The guy who's, spoiler, ultimately gonna make the rings. It was weird seeing an actor that visibly aged. I'm like, dude, you look old. I thought like elves didn't really age. Why do you like look old? And again, it's something that might not bother me, except so much is inviting comparison to the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit movies that it stands out. It's like, you guys are elves? Really? Like, her I buy. Elrond I'm getting used to. I'm still a little the guy who's the guardsman who's, got his crush on the human. He's fine. He works. But like a lot of the others, I'm like, And like I said, that's petty. That's petty, and that's also personal. There's probably some people out there with different, tastes than me going, oh, these ones are even prettier. And like, cool. Good. I'm happy for you. But, for me, given how pretty the elves always seem to be before, this just feels like it's not the same level, or it's approaching it from a different angle that isn't quite lining up. I don't know. But I know I've spent most of this sort of issuing complaints, but the thing is, none of this makes me angry. I don't think any of this is an affront to J.R.R. Tolkien or to the Lord of the Rings movies or even the Hobbit movies, which I don't like. But it's just not doing much for me. Again, that said, the clunkiest stuff was in the first episode. So second episode was better. It introduced some characters with more life to them, which it needed. And like I said, I'll probably stick, or I'll at least try to stick with it through the first season. If I do, I'll definitely give my thoughts once the season's done. And if anything happens in any specific episode that I'm like, I want to talk about that, then you might get an episode review. But don't expect episode by episode going forward, just because like I've got too much other stuff to do. And I'm not sure I'm going to have too much new to say on a per episode basis. We'll see, though. We'll see. It has potential. It definitely could start engaging me more than it is. It's not really there yet. So for me right now, I don't love the start. I could see it getting better. And so I'm going to try and stick with this first season to see if it, in fact, does get better. If it doesn't, I probably won't be back for a future season. If it does, I'll be very happy to report that back. But right now, it's just kind of, What do you think about this thing? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon is what pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. Any amount that you can contribute to that helps. There are perks. Actually, this month is the 10th anniversary for Council of Geeks, the main channel, and I'm doing a Patreon exclusive Q&A. So if that's something you want to participate in, that's, jump on that. But now that I'm done self-promoting, don't worry too much about it. The other stuff I mentioned, like, share, subscribe, they help as well. But, more than anything, we try and take a relaxed attitude around here. So why not just come on back next time you need a break? Time to give my thanks to my highest supporting patrons. That would include Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Oliver B., Melinda Walters, Emu Delkey, Theotha Boyd, Becky Sparks, Fernabi Likes the Poodle, Zach, Idolin, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Adam RDL Taylor, Shane Ross, Shaylee Gourlay, Brendan LaRose, and TT. If you want your name said while these guys try and distract me, consider looking at the rewards of my Patreon.